These are some of the saddest and most heartless scams out there. Let's get started with number 6, the Heartless Pastor. Pauline Bryce and her epileptic son had their life savings stolen by Gary and Jahmal Souffrant, who posed as pastors selling some land. Gary and his son convinced the 71-year-old Pauline that they had land in Plantation, Florida, and told Pauline to put down $20,000 to get a contract for it. Pauline saw this as an opportunity to get some needed security for her and her son, so she scraped it together, handing over her entire life savings. Pauline had no idea that the pastor who contacted her had been involved in a multi-million-dollar scam of $7 million with his wife. After serving time for this, Gary was back to scam her of her entire life savings while posing as a pastor. At the time, Pauline hadn't seen her own son in weeks and was concerned about him living on the street. The property and plantation would give them both a safe place to stay and ease her stress. Pauline called the police when she realized that she'd been scammed, and they quickly found and arrested Gary. Police were initially unable to find Gary's son and co-conspirator, but Jahmal ended up turning himself in a day later. Pauline was happy both men were caught, but was obviously hurt by Jahmal, who had once called her grandma and couldn't understand why he'd do this to her. Though both men have been arrested, it's unlikely Pauline will ever see her money again. Number 5, the Heartless Realtor. Richard Troy McConaughey had been homeless for more than a year in San Fernando, having only a picture of his driver's license as a means of identification. One day, Troy received an inheritance check of $73,000 from his grandfather's estate. Planning to turn his life around and get himself off of the street, Troy was excited to cash the check. Troy had attempted to open a bank account on many occasions so he could cash the check, but the lack of any solid proof of identification made it impossible. So he carried the life-changing money for months, hoping to somehow figure out how to get it. Then, Troy met a real estate agent named Allison Renaro, who claimed to be able to help solve his problems by suggesting they open a joint bank account. Since Troy had no other options, thought he might as well give it a shot. So, Renaro got him cleaned up, and in a new set of clothes, they marched into the bank with him. As soon as the money was in the joint account, however, Renaro drained it and left at her first opportunity. Troy had planned to make the most of his second chance. He wanted to get clean by going to rehab and buy an RV so he could get himself off the streets. But all his plans were quickly deflated. McConaughey was fairly well known by residents in the neighborhood he frequented. Gary O'Neill, one of Troy's friends, warned him about Renaro after having met her, expressing that he got a bad vibe. It was also known in the community that Troy was getting a check because he talks a lot, and he'd been warned multiple times. Renaro quit her job while using Troy's money to fund her life. She refused any contact with him, as well as refusing to comment to any reporters, but neighbors have said she's living off the money she drained from the homeless guy. Troy filed a police report, and charges have been filed, but there's been very little movement on the case. Eric Ramsey, Troy's friend, heard what happened to him and started a GoFundMe account. Eric said that he couldn't just watch Troy suffer like that, and something had to be done about it. Now, with more than 600 donors, he has raised about $18,000. Number 4, the Heartless Romance. Cindy Tsai, a Chinese lawyer living in Massachusetts, was diagnosed with gastric cancer not long after getting divorced from her husband of 16 years. Divorce is hard enough in the best of circumstances, but it's even worse when dealing with cancer at the same time. Cindy's ex-husband didn't even show up to support her after her diagnosis or during her first round of chemotherapy, which had the cancer in remission in January of 2021. Unfortunately, in September of the same year, gastric cancer came back and was terminal. Jimmy first texted Cindy in early October 2021, pretending to be looking for Linda, a woman he met at the pet store. Cindy cleared up the misunderstanding, but the two continued talking after learning of their shared Chinese heritage. The relationship blossomed with playful picture exchanges of everything to the food they were eating to goofy selfies. Cindy had found a much-needed companion during her most difficult times, relying on a comfort that couldn't have come at a better time. Cindy was typically a very cautious person, but found herself one of the over 400 victims of romance scams in Massachusetts in 2021. Cindy, at her lowest point, received attention from Jimmy and quickly fell into his trap. Luring her with attention and care, Jimmy pretended to be concerned about her everyday activities and cancer treatment. In the first 10 days of their communications, Cindy was love-bombed by Jimmy, who appeared to be everything she needed, which at that time was endless emotional support. After those 10 days, Jimmy turned the conversation towards money. Jimmy talked about how he moved to the United States and how his family was into the clothing industry in Los Angeles. He also talked about how the pandemic had forced them to close shop. Later, Jimmy moved on to talk about his profession, which was crypto trading, which he said was incredibly successful and compared to Cindy's previous foray into the market of buying and selling real estate. Cindy was hesitant, but Jimmy offered appealing screenshots of his crypto returns. He knew Cindy was also reading about people like Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey and billionaire Elon Musk, who were heavily invested in crypto, so her hesitancy began to dissipate. Jimmy then showed her an online trading market, which was really just a fake site with a similar name and appearance of a legitimate site. Cindy could pull money back out in the early days just to convince her everything was on the up and up. Jimmy even agreed to a video chat, which Cindy said helped calm her suspicions over apparent red flags. But in the end, Jimmy's confidence tricks made it appear that he was helping her become a crypto success by providing loans into the pretend platform, and it cost her $2.5 million. Sadly, because the scammers operate outside the US, Cindy was told not to expect to ever see her money again. Number 3. Cant Buy Me Love. A grandmother, known only as Susie, was relentless in her quest for love. She was so desperate that she managed to get in relationships with 3 men who ended up stealing more than her heart, over 206,000 pounds more, and her house. To Susie, men aren't all they're cracked up to be. Susie first met David, who claimed to be from the UK, with whom she ended up in a relationship. She gave David access to her bank account after he said he needed to buy a laptop. Susie was shocked to find that 42,000 pounds of her father's money had disappeared, along with David. After her first loss, Susie refused to give up on love and went on to have conversations with Johnson Williams. John claimed that he was an American soldier at the war front against the Taliban. John continually pestered Susie with requests for money, so much so that she ended up selling her house to get it to him. She became suspicious when she noticed that her money was being wired to Ghana. Susie had sent Johnson roughly 167,000 pounds. Susie, ever the optimist, was still willing to try for love one last time when she met a Ugandan, Godfrey Kizungo, via Facebook. The two got married in Africa and are still married, but Kisungo had been pestering her constantly for money and Australian citizenship. Susie grew tired of his demands and plans to annul the marriage. In the end, Susie was left with 3 failed relationships, a drained bank account, and no home. She admits that in her longing for a companion, she was desperately trying to buy love and was perhaps a little brainwashed. Number 2. Beta for life. Susan Perry, who was 73 at the time, got into a conversation with a young stranger on Facebook in a bid to search for a boyfriend. Susan had become dissatisfied with her marriage and had gone on a little Facebook adventure in her search for spontaneity that was more than she bargained for. After seeing the younger man's handsome profile picture, Susan was interested in the con man's invitation to chat. Gideon said he had a 14-year-old son named Paul and began feeding Susan various lies about his son's car accidents, subsequent hospital bills, and boarding school tuition in Dubai. Susan was drawn in by Gideon's daily sweet messages and his nice-sounding French accent. She would talk with him for hours on end and called him when her husband wasn't around. Susan loved that Gideon was so genuinely interested in her life. Gideon loved hearing about her hobbies and told Susan he worked on an oil rig, causing him to be away from Paul, who he dearly missed. When Paul was home from the rig, Paul was often at boarding school in Dubai, leaving Gideon alone and lonely. Susan never hid the fact that she was married, but had sympathy for Gideon. She never revealed her chats with Gideon to her husband because she felt that she wasn't doing anything wrong. However, Susan was so drawn in that she would send online boyfriend money whenever he needed it, starting with 400 pounds, which quickly ballooned to 40,000 pounds. The first lie fed to Susan was that Gideon's son had been seriously injured in a hit and run and needed help to fund his life-saving surgery. Quickly, Susan loaned out her life savings with assurances of repayment and even pawned her gemstone jewelry when she overdrafted. To continue to build her confidence, Gideon had offered Susan half of his paycheck, which she rejected, feeling it would be wrong to accept the money at that point. One day, Gideon told Susan his rig had been attacked by pirates and he needed 14,000 pounds to get a helicopter to come rescue his men. Gideon. Worried, Susan sent him the money and waited in anticipation for word on if everyone was okay, and was relieved to find out they were. Gideon kept appreciating her and called her an angel while promising to pay back everything at the end of his work at the oil rig. Susan had maxed out her credit card to pay for Gideon's son's operation from the hit and run, and was relieved when she got a message saying Paul had recovered. Gideon next messaged her that he had been paid and would transfer what he owed the next day. This was good news, since Susan had many sleepless nights stressing about how she was going to pay off her card. Susan was crushed the next morning when she received a phone call from Gideon's son. His dad had a heart attack and died. Susan was devastated, feeling like she'd lost the love of her life. After coming clean about the ordeal to her husband and daughter, Susan came to the realization that she had been scammed. Susan made a police report, and after an investigation, said there was no trace of any such Gideon or Paul. Gordon, Susan's husband, said he had suspected that things were falling apart and that he was hurt, but took responsibility for not giving his wife the attention she needed. He said he didn't blame her for falling for the con, since these guys knew what they were doing. Susan has since paid off her £7,000 credit card loans and bought back her jewelry. She still owes around £15,000 that's going to take more of their golden years to pay off. Number 1. The Heart. TikToker Stephanie Thacker has lived in her car with her dog Millie for nearly a year. She often dropped videos of life in the car with her dog as she searched for a place to rent on Facebook. Thacker's followers were with her every day for months while she toiled away working for DoorDash until she saved enough money to get a place she could afford. Eventually, Stephanie found a place on Facebook and excitedly contacted the owner. The new potential landlord agreed to the place to her and sent Stephanie a legitimate-looking contract. Stephanie sent her entire life savings of over $2,000 as first month's rent and deposit to the landlord using Chime. Once the funds had been received, the landlord disappeared, leaving Stephanie broke. Stephanie showed up at the listing anyway with some hope, but discovered that the property was already rented out. With no place to go, Stephanie camped in her car at the address and called the police to get help. When the police arrived, they told her that it would be a year before she could get her money back. Stephanie quickly reported the case to Chime, with her followers calling the bank app out on social media. Chime's official page responded, saying that they saw cases like this as serious and would investigate. When Chime completed their investigation and found no faults with the transactions, they refused to return Stephanie's money despite screenshots. Her followers were moved by the story and tried to comfort her while telling her to get a new bank, even going as far as reprimanding Chime. As people were comforting her on her page, there was no shortage of comments chiding her for making online transactions with a stranger. There's an entire Reddit forum claiming that Stephanie Thacker is a scammer making up stories to get people to donate money. The Reddit users claim to have evidence that she's not homeless, that she used all the money she received on GoFundMe to buy clothes, and she's continuing to scam good-hearted people online. One user even posted a conversation with Thacker's dad explaining that she's living with a deadbeat boyfriend, that she does have a place to stay, but that the boyfriend isn't welcome. The most recent update appears to show her living in an apartment with her boyfriend and her playing the victim. It's heartless to steal from someone who's homeless. It's even more heartless to scam people who want to help. Chime may have been right. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments below whether or not you think Stephanie Thacker is telling the truth.